we'll give it another minute or so, and then we'll get started. And while we wait, I can address the burning question, which is how, Mark and Chase, did you guys change your clothes so quickly, and how were you two places at once? Well, obviously the session wasn't pre-recorded because it was compelling and live. No, we pre-recorded the session. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, and thanks to everybody who's joining the roundtable now. We had a couple questions come up in the chat in the other session, and then obviously we've got questions popping into the chat here in this roundtable as well. Chase and I have as much time as is needed by the group, so feel free to ask questions. If you want to come off mute and share your screen and introduce yourself, we'd love to have you up on the virtual stage with us to engage in a conversation as well. So I'm not sure exactly how to do that. Not sure exactly how to do that, but we'll try to figure it out. So maybe we can start with we'll start with Michael Beckerman's question, since we should pay homage to our host. And Chase, Michael Beckerman wants to know: are you old enough to drink yet? I know the answer. I think Beckerman knows the answer too.
I think it's because I've been shaving my own head. It makes me look younger, so I appreciate that, Michael. You're too kind. But yes, living with a 2-year-old during a pandemic, I thought would have aged me. So I am 35 now, and I had my first beer.
Michael's just looking for somebody to go out and drink tequila with.
Yeah, it's true. What I would give for that, my friend. What I would give for that.
There it is. We know your agenda, Michael. All right, so let's start with some of the questions, and Tom, we'll hit yours first, since I know you asked this question during the session as well, which is the HqO an open data platform, and is the data portable? So Chase, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So HqO is an open data platform in some sense. In the sense that the landlord can take the data out, yes. Third-party developers and third-party folks looking for data can't access a specific customer's data set, but landlords have the ability to take the data out. The data ownership, we believe, and is a critical piece of our model, is that the value we provide to our landlord customers is that software that helps facilitate a great experience at the property. It's also becoming a data-driven organization, making sure that our customers own data, begin to use data in ways that we think are increasingly important as the as commercial real estate changes. So for the landlord and the customer, we are an open data platform. We also announced a new product called the Digital Grid. And what we're doing with the grid is essentially, most of our customers are interested in broader market intelligence. So when you think about how a person uses your asset, it's super valuable data to have that on one of your own assets or your full portfolio, but it's even more valuable if you're able to, in a secure way, compare the use of your asset with a broader market. So if you want to see how people use your properties compared to other buildings in your neighborhood, how would they use your properties compared to other similar asset types, other assets that have similar types of tenants. So let's say a building that have a lot of tech tenants. So what we've done and worked with clients on is the Digital Grid makes it easy to anonymize and aggregate data. So if you give to the grid, you get from the grid. And if you give anonymized and aggregate data, you can get anonymized and aggregate data. If you're willing to share more of the identity, say we're willing to say 100 Main Street, and we don't mind if people see how our asset is used, you can see the data of other people who have opted into that permission level. So the answer is broadly, for the most part, yes, it's open in the ways that the customer decides.
Awesome. and I just figured out how to invite people onto our virtual stage here. So, Paul Newman, you asked a related question on the data, which is how do you balance the negative Big Brother is watching versus the positive of using data to enhance experience? And maybe let me invite you to the video call, and hopefully that works, and you can join us on the virtual stage here, and we can talk through that a little bit. As a jumping off point, I'll start with the positive side because I'm not sure I understand your question on the Big Brother piece. I think the positive of using data to enhance experience is that historically, when we think about real estate, and Chase and I don't come from real estate directly, although we've had a crash course over the last few years. Real estate to most people is like location, 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 right? And as I talked about at the beginning of the conversation with quick serve restaurants, the differentiation from building to building in a metro, or when you're looking at suburban office parks or whatever, is really in that last mile. It's that last 10%. And historically, there's not been a lot of data on the people who are using the buildings, and buildings are only valuable if there are people in them and using them, right? So we think that by aggregating lots of different data across the suite stack, so the organizing principles and taxonomy of the building, the system stack, all the technologies that are playing a role in driving the building, right, and efficiency, and then the services stack, all of the amenities and services and other things that you're providing to your occupants, and overlaying that with tenant data, so tenant satisfaction, gives you a really powerful tool set for decision making when you're thinking about how to allocate CapEx and OpEx spend, or how to think about leasing strategies or retention strategies or rent strategies. We've got I'll give a good example. We have Michael Phillips from Jamestown as the keynote right before Chase and I went on the stage, and Jamestown was one of our first customers at their innovation and design building in Boston. And one of the things that that Jamestown had in making a key leasing decision was data, right? So when they launched with HqO, one of the things that they did as part of an incentive to drive engagement with the application and downloads and usage was they brought in a mobile manicurist on site, and they sort of underwrote the cost and gave her some space, and you had to sign up for the manicurist through the app. And then ultimately they transitioned to scheduling and paying for the manicurist through the app. So users would pay for their own manicures. Sell out. They brought her back week after week. They added another day. She continued to sell out. Last fall, she signed a lease in the building. So she's now a full-time tenant. And what was great about that is that there wasn't enough supply to meet the building demand. So as a manicurist, as a sole proprietor, she felt very comfortable knowing that the demand was there were she to sign a lease and be there full time. For users in the building, now there's an increase in supply, and they don't have to rush to book their appointments, a week or 2 weeks out for fear that they're going to get locked out. And then for Jamestown signing the lease, they have lots of data to know, one, that she was going to be able to pay her rent, two, which tenant companies and which users were most frequently using the service, so they could think about where in the various spaces, and they have like shipping containers on the property, like where to put her, right? So do we want to put her closest to the companies that most frequently use her, or do we want to put her further away so that the people have to travel through the building and get exposure to other retail and other things that are there? They had data to think about the leasing strategy. So do they want to do a % rent lease, or do they want to do a flat rate lease, and so on, right? So that data is really powerful in terms of positive enhancements for landlords, users, and tenant companies. On the Big Brother side, I don't know. As I said in the talk, I came from Google. Everybody's being watched all the time by everyone, and certainly millennials and Gen Zers and a lot of Gen Xers are willing to trade their data and their privacy for services and experiences, right? So we haven't had that as a concern at HqO, but we take data and compliance really seriously. We are GDPR compliant, SOC 2 compliant. ISO 27000 series compliant, EU and Swiss US Privacy Shield. We'll see how that nets out in Europe going forward, but we take privacy and compliance really seriously as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing I'll say about Big Brother and the dynamic of I don't come from Google, whereas Mark was once a part of Big Brother, but I think part of the structure with regards to how we think about data and what's really important about it is there's no monopoly in commercial real estate, right? There's lots of different owners in different regions and areas, and owning the data sets that are associated with the buildings, I think, is really important when you think about a much more distributed data ownership. So I think, rather than these monoliths where you have one major corporation owning all of the data on, critical thing, action or two that people can take online, when you think about how people use the built world and how that data is collected, having it owned within the different owners, I think, is kind of an important development with regards to consumer privacy. And I think ultimately the way that you get intelligence as an asset owner is not necessarily knowing what John or Jane Doe is doing individually in your building. All of our customers are saying, we really don't want to be in a position where we can abuse this data. We want to be in a position where we can get insights in aggregate. So I think there's natural alignment on certain ways that the data can be organized, not just for us at HqO, but kind of across prop tech. That's going to be ultimately better for the consumer, which we think is important.
Catherine asked a question: is the digital grid addressing data specifically on tenant experience or also building operations? So I sort of touched on the suite stack, system stack, services stack, and tenant data. But Chase, you want to go one level deeper?
Yeah. So Catherine, ultimately the goal here is to overlay human behavior data on any critical data set that essentially is not necessarily financial. We think that between the ERP systems and a number of the leasing systems and anything that you use for modeling or discounting cash flow, the financial data world of commercial real estate is very well organized and well run. And we want to make the data for our clients portable in ways that however you use data to compete and get an edge in the market, whether that's pulling it into something like an Argus or however you're doing modeling in Excel, or putting it into a system like VTS. Our goal is to make the data useful to the client wherever they want to pull it. But the model that we've created with the digital grid pulls from any system that can capture human behavior data. So when you think about energy use, obviously a lot of that is driven by how people are using an asset. So we have modeled it in a way that you can start to pull data from building systems. You can pull data from any source of data that, say, is a Bluetooth sensor in a building that's connected at a property. So the idea is that you're collecting data through, an application interface like HqO. How often does an elevator go to the 15th floor or whatever it is? So we've made it very all-encompassing in terms of the full data set on asset use.
Cool. I think we have a live question here. So let's see if this works and we can get. No, maybe not. Okay.
A couple of questions up above too.
Yep, for sure. So we already covered Beckerman's question. You want to talk about M&A, Chase? So how do you see M&A playing into your data platform development strategy, data set ads?
Yeah. So we're lucky in prop tech. I think there's a lot of really good companies that are solving a lot of critical problems within kind of the overall problem set of how do you make the the built world and real estate more broadly become tech, different areas of real estate that will receive a lot of benefit from becoming tech enabled. I think a lot of the challenge is that there are too many point solutions or features that are not full-blown products. Teams are really good, the features are really well developed, but in terms of technology, obviously one of the biggest challenges is distribution. So there's a lot of good technology companies that never really get off the ground because go-to-market is really, really difficult, particularly in commercial industry, commercial real estate, it can be particularly difficult. So when we think about our platform development, we very deliberately started at the user interface level with HqO. We thought it was really important to start with the end user of a building. And we have now moved, in tech terms, down the stack to create, really what is a middleware with HqOS. And this is the ability to plug lots of different technologies into a platform that can both be bundled to the consumer, the end user of a building, but also plug that data into the digital grid. And when we think about our platform build and M&A, our lead investor is a group called Insight Partners out of New York City. They're a $9.5 billion fund that can do early stage venture type investments, but they can also, move later stage and, look into leverage buyouts and things like that. So we look at everything through the lens of, can we move into a new market that we think is aligned with a lot of our current customer base? We're in business with 24 of the largest 100 landlords. So we're always looking to serve them in more markets that are important to them. And then number two, we look for things that, we have a product and technology roadmap that's 4 years out. So if there's anything that's in year 3 or year 4, that we think could shorten our roadmap, particularly if the team has an expertise that we might not have in-house. We're constantly looking at good technology that might not have great distribution, because we tend to do pretty well in distribution. So M&A is something that we're always interested in. I think the biggest challenge that we tend to run into, there's a lot of really good companies in prop tech, is integration cost. How does the team integrate with ours at HqO? Which is really, we have a very strong emphasis on our culture. And then ultimately, in early stage technology, the multiples that venture capitalists are looking for don't always, they're aspirational. So they don't always align with kind of the true value of the business as it stands. So those are the two things that ultimately, when the rubber meets the road, typically prevent us from moving forward and buying something. But we certainly are looking.
Cool. So you mentioned our company culture. One of our core values of the company is truth. So I want to tackle Michael Beckerman's other question, which is, how has business been for HqO during the pandemic? And in full, and Chase jump in here as well, but I think full transparency, when everything started in the middle or end of March, we really weren't sure what the impact was going to be on the business. And for about 45 days, there was sort of a screeching halt as everybody retrenched and tried to figure out how they were going to set up the VPNs for their employees and how they were going to get their desktop computers home for their employees so people could work remotely and still maintain some semblance of productivity. And what we saw starting in like the beginning of May is just an absolute eruption of interest and inbound conversations. Landlords, what we're seeing is that the market is really focused on repopulating their buildings. It's pretty clear that nobody believes office is going away. John Gray talked about this on the Blackstone earnings call the other day. There are enough factors that are favorable to offset the less favorable ones. Anecdotally, when we talk to people outside the industry, when I talk to people in my social circle, I'm sure this is good for everybody on the call, there are benefits to working remotely and there are benefits to flexibility. I love not having a 2-hour commute every day, but I miss the collaboration. I miss the community. I miss the amenities in my office. I miss the space and the transition time from work to home. that I had previously, and those are pretty consistent themes that we hear, and we've heard it in some research that we've done as well. So, people want to go back to work. Landlords want to welcome people back to work. Population is continuing to grow. The workforce is continuing to grow. The trend of de-densification we expect will sort of swing back and require more space. So even if there's an increase in flexibility, those other factors we think offset that, right? So so now we understand people will go back to work at some point, and landlords are spending a lot of time thinking about, okay, how do I do that? How do I do that in a way that makes them feel safe, that makes them feel comfortable, that makes them feel good about coming back into the office, and fulfills those needs for connection, community, collaboration, amenities, and so on. And so we're really focused on helping landlords in 4 key areas. Logistics, so those are things like food and beverage order ahead, so you're not creating lines and gatherings in restaurants during lunchtime or coffee time or whatever. Health, safety, and communication, right? So those are sort of the 4 big buckets that we're focused on with landlords, and we, like I said, had a surge of inbound and interest and been really, really busy. So I hope that answers the question. Another question here is about multifamily residential. How can you change the environment of a multifamily unit? So I think Chase is probably what you were talking about with atomic habits and what I added on with the Google cafeteria, but it feels like you're having almost no impact on what people do inside their apartments. They can go full unhealthy style. How do we help them? You want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't serve multifamily residential as of today, but I don't think when you think about environment design and how environment influences human behavior, I don't think it's the macro is the same across different real estate types. And I do think this is why office is so important, right? Like you can just see working from home, if you're sitting on a couch and the TV's in front of you, there are different cues and triggers that either get you to do healthy habits or they push you towards poor habits, right? So seeing your running shoes might trigger you to go running. Seeing the coffee machine might trigger you to drink a cup of coffee, sit down on the couch. Next thing you know, you're on social media, and then you never go for that run, and meetings have started and you're in Zoom for the whole day, right? So I think certainly not an expert in physical environment design or anything like that, but I do think what we do and what is exactly the same regardless of whether it's a home unit or a work unit when you're thinking about physical space is ultimately it's going to need to be measured and data driven. So when you think about the different things that people are engaging with, we would lead with data. We're technologists, so that's how we think, but I think there's a lot, outside of kind of the basic things that a lot of architects and developers and builders look into in terms of natural sunlight, and all those things are great. But I think where the latent opportunity is to start to measure usage through internet connected devices, certain sensors, things like that, to get smart about how people are using the unit. And then when you think about how you help people, that's a very broad definition of what people want to be helped with. So I won't wade too far into that, but I do think, I think the most exciting part of prop tech, and I talk about this a lot internally at HqO, so Mark has heard this a ton, but I'm relatively jaded about the impacts that social media is having on society in terms of tribalism, misinformation, loneliness, depression, and what we have is an opportunity, not just HqO, but all of us, both the commercial real estate industry and the technology industry serving it, is an opportunity to use technology to drive real world connection, which I think is really, really important and needed now more than ever. Local communities where people look each other in the eye, care about each other, speak respectfully to one another, do healthy things together, I think is super important. So that's, it's a worthy question and certainly a big challenge in terms of, how we design to help people. But I think it all has to be measured and data driven.
Cool. Another question on data. Is the data collection, this is from Angela Biggs. Thanks for your question, Angela. Is the data collection dependent on tenant employees downloading the app? If they do not do so, what alternative ways do you collect data? Do you compete with third-party apps like Mealplan?
Yeah. So the tenant app is one main way that we collect data, but it is not the only way. So it was the first way, and we started really at the tenant application layer. That was our first product. And what we have since rolled out is a product called HqOS, which has a component called the digital grid. And what HqOS is enabling for landlords is take, for example, Mealplan. There are lots of different third-party applications that do a really great job of creating rich experiences that are either related to or tethered to a physical property experience. You think about the app that you use with regards to the shuttle that gets you to and from a property, or the app that you use maybe as your digital key card, like an OpenPath or a proxy, an app that you use for safety or emergency notifications, or an app like Mealplan. And what we've recognized is that landlords have this tremendous opportunity to bundle technology in a way that makes it much more convenient for the consumer in one landlord app. And then the value to them on the back end, obviously, is starting to collect data from both third-party applications, but also what HqOS does is pull data off of things physically at the building that also measure human behavior. So if you want to know what somebody's doing at a building, obviously actions that they're taking in an application for the building is one way to do it, but there's also lots of other sources of data at a property. And our North Star and where we're trying to deliver for landlords is you truly want a 360-degree view of how the end user of your product uses your product, the building, right? And in order to get that comprehensive picture, you have to pull data from different sources, and then you have to have a standardized data model in which it can be organized so that you can then comp one building to another, a building, a portfolio to another portfolio. So that's what the digital grid is a data model and the capability to pull data from multiple sources.
And I think that's related to Frank Spatafora's question also, which is, have you had any success correlating individual experience amenity features to premiums, or are they still being analyzed qualitatively for overall impact on lease rates? And then he's got a follow-up, but let's start with that one. And I think their correlation and causation are hard in real estate because the cycles are long, right? And the prop tech companies are generally pretty young. HqO is about 2.5 years old. So when you think about average lease cycles of 7.6 years or 7.8 years is the average lease cycle right now. For a company that's 2.5 years old, we haven't seen enough cycles to really have hard data to draw those correlations. We got a lot of anecdotal evidence. We've got a lot of stories. Chase and I could tell stories all day long, like the manicure story that I shared before. But that's largely anecdotal, right? And we know the market is looking for more. I think by this time next year, and certainly by the year after, we'll have a much richer and larger data set with which we can draw some of those correlations between experience and user data and all of the other sources that are funneling into the digital grid, and rents and retention and all the true ROI metrics that we know the industry is looking for. Chase, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Or...
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the data product, as we continue to collect more data at scale, it's not ever going to be definitive in terms of like, here's the one thing that got that company to lease a space, because that's not how companies lease space, right? So when you put $10 million into a lobby renovation, it certainly helps, but I don't know if you can go up to a 10 that you ended up leasing from the building. You might get a one-off here or there, but typically there is, a few decision makers and obviously committees that are picking property or beginning to engage with more people depending on the size of the tenant type, right? Obviously, much different decision-making process at the Fortune 500s and things like that. But it tends to be a number of different inputs. And the goal for us here is really to start to enable landlords to optimize the probability of success, where if you think you have, depending on the market you're in and the economic trends in that market, are technology firms growing compared to the traditional kind of financial insurance real estate, and what mix of things have worked at other where there's a high density of technology firms, right? Like what are the critical elements? It's probably not going to be one or two magic bullets, but if you can start to get kind of the overall blend of influences and interests of different tenant types based off of industry size, composition of the employee base, things like that, then you can start to truly be smart when you're thinking about both capital investments, but also operating expenses on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's where the benchmarks are really powerful, right? We put all these sources together and you're able to benchmark. The follow-up that Frank asks is, what will the impact of the current disruption have on isolating that data to confirm ROI for tenant experience investments? I think this is a good opportunity for the market to be doubling down on their investments, right? So I got an email yesterday. We ski up in New Hampshire every year. One of the restaurants we go to sent out an email to customers and people who've been there that said, we're taking the opportunity while the restaurant has been closed to invest in making some renovations that we wanted to make for many years. We're adding an outdoor seating area with a tiki bar, and we're reconfiguring the indoor space, and so on and so forth. And I thought that was really smart. We have an opportunity while our buildings are less occupied, the occupancy is lower, to make some of the investments and set ourselves up for future success in ways that we couldn't otherwise. So taking this time not to press pause, but to press go and fast forward and say, okay, if we want to have a unified experience and a unified platform for people when they come back to the building, what technologies do we need to connect together, and how quickly can we move to integrate our access control system with our tenant, mobile application, with our visitor management system, with our food and beverage ordering, and with our transit, so that we have a universal remote for people when they come back to work that really removes friction for them and allows us as a landlord to get much more intelligent through the data collection that we can acquire through a single screen, right, or a single source.
Yeah, and I think particularly with regards to COVID, the ROIs, I think a little bit more obvious, with regards to touchless access, touchless elevator, certain scheduling and pickup and delivery functionality that previous to COVID, I think some of these things were vitamins, not painkillers, nice to have, not need to have. And now, we've talked to, we're in a few dozen markets across the US. We're in London, we're in Paris, and it's pretty consistent that employers are going to be very cautious about returning to the office. And safety is obviously number one priority, and anything that we can do to make the office a safer place is ultimately good for the industry. So I think, from an ROI perspective, as people look to take space as they eventually come back, I think they're going to be expecting certain elements of experience that probably weren't table stakes pre-COVID that are going to be table stakes now.
Question. I think we've one more question we haven't addressed yet, and if there are more, please drop them into the chat. This is from Matt. It says, after commenting on our smooth change, what are the next locations upon adding UK and France? So Matt, I think the thing that's most important for us is that we deliver for our customers, and to do that requires taking a really thoughtful and measured approach to how we deploy in market. We're fortunate to have never lost a customer. We just got back our Net Promoter Score survey from second quarter in June, and we got a 92. So just for people who aren't familiar with Net Promoter Score, minus 100 to plus 100 is the range, and a 92 is like off the charts good. So we feel really good about the feedback that we're getting from customers, the validation of never having lost a customer. And what that means is that we want to continue to serve our customers in the way that we have been, which is by blending great technology, so the science of what we do, with great service, which is the art of what we do, and our fantastic team, our tenant experience team, that really partners with landlords to drive on strategy and planning. So we're live, as Chase said, we're live in the US, Canada, the UK, France. We've just signed assets in. We just signed one asset in the Netherlands as our sort of next step. But we're taking a very measured approach, and we want to make sure we get it right in these markets. We're learning a lot as we go about what we need to do to localize the application to make it relevant for those specific markets, making sure that the language is translated effectively and properly, and that we're doing the integrations with the right partners that are most prevalent in those markets or most desired for our landlords. So we want to really nail the markets we're in before we think about further expansion. And I think that's all we have for questions in the chat. But again, I would invite anybody who'd like to ask another question or to come off mute and hop up on the virtual stage with us.
What's up, man? All right. Well, thank you everybody for the questions. We appreciate it. Not often do we get to just talk uninterrupted like this. This is great.
Yeah, it's good. And if anybody has follow-ups, you can reach me at Mark, M-A-R-K, at HqO.co. So not .com, but Mark at HqO.co. Jim, you can definitely start drinking now. Beckerman's looking for somebody to do tequila shots with. So hop in a virtual breakout room and grab your bottles. Should be good. Cheers. All right. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Appreciate the opportunity.